The game that you're about to witness is going to show you how good these top players are, how strong they are, and how they are able to make sense of seemingly positions that look very difficult to understand on the surface. It's the game between Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana from the 8th round of the candidates. And before this round began, let me just show you what the standings of the tournament looked like. So these are the standings of the event. Before the round began, Nepo was leading, Caruana was at number 2, and Nakamura was at number 3 spot. And there was a big gap between Nakamura on 3.5, Caruana on 5, and Nepo on 5.5. So this game was quite important for Hikaru, and let's see how he managed to put a lot of pressure on Fabi. Opens the game with e4, and we have the Ruy Lopez a6, and actually Nakamura was able to guess Fabiano Caruana's opening, because Caruana could have played knight f6 here. He could have also played on move 2 knight f6 going into the Petrov, but Nakamura felt that Caruana would want to keep the game going because he also is trailing half a point behind Nepo. So in that sense, you want to choose an opening where you have certain chances and not a very drawish one. And from that perspective, the open Ruy Lopez fits the bill perfectly. d4, b5, bishop b3, d5 takes, bishop e6, all standard stuff. Knight d2 is one way to play here. He went for the move c3, which is also very normal. Bishop to c5, knight d2, you castle, and bishop to c2. In this position, you can no longer keep your knight in the center. If you try for f5, it does not really work. I mean, knight b3, and white is doing very well with the knight coming to d4. So that's the reason why knight f2 has become the main move here, rook f2. And now f6 used to be played a lot. And well, if you were to take on f6 here, then we would lead to a different position. But after knight f1, threatening bishop e3, then generally, I mean, the game he has to take and fe5, and the game transposes into what we are going to see. So Caruana took directly, king takes and f6. Now if you were to take queen f6, this position has been played several times, and black is having compensation. It has been proven. So that's the reason why knight f1 was played, fe5, king g1, and queen d6. This was seen in the game between Jordan Van Forest. He's played 2 games in this line, one against Eric Hansen and another one against Caruana himself. So Caruana felt that this was a strong way to play. Knight g5 was played by Eric, and which was not a good move, because after bishop f5, it seems like black is doing pretty okay, I mean, in this position. So bishop e3 by Hikaru was very good. This was all his preparation. Bishop to f5. Here's a small question to you. After bishop g4, why is this not a good move? White to play. It looks pretty strong, right? You are just pinning the knight. Yeah, the move here is bishop h7 check. Beautiful move. King takes h7 and knight g5, winning this bishop on g4. So that is a winning idea. But bishop f5 was played, and now here Hikaru played bishop b3. I am not so sure as to if this is the only way to play. Maybe this is the best way according to the engines. But you could also play bishop f5, rook f5, and knight g3. And this is also a very plausible way to play, like rook f8, b4 maybe, with the idea of putting your bishop on c5. But he went for the move here, bishop b3, attacking d5, rook a d8, queen e1. Yes, you could have played bishop to g5, but then rook d7 still keeps in touch with the d5 pawn. So queen e1, knight to a5, queen f2. I want to go to c5. So knight b7, stopping it. There's no time to take the bishop on b3. And now comes the move rook e1. If he had gone rook d1, then black would have gone c6 and rook e1 was played. If you look at this position carefully, I think it's so difficult for both sides to play. First of all, for white, because these two black pawns are so strong and covering all the squares here. Oops, sorry, here. And for white, how do I place all my pieces is a big question. And for black, how do I get my pawns rolling? Because the moment I play e4, he gets d4. The moment I push d4, things start opening up. I mean, I cannot push because of this bishop. So it's not easy to play for both sides. And this is where I feel like this is a real skill of these top players. They are able to make sense of such positions and find good moves. So firstly, c5, I think it was still preparation. I was thinking about bishop g4 here. That was played in this correspondence game between Roy and Nurtawa. Queen g3, takes, knight a5, bishop c2, and this ended in white's victory. White seems to be better here. Fabiano maybe improved on it with c5, and now Hikaru forgot his preparation at this point, which in the end seems like a blessing in disguise, because if he had gone bishop g5, then after c4, bishop d8, c takes b3, bishop h4, b takes a2, rook a1, bishop b1. This is all his preparation. Queen g6, queen b7, rook f3, queen d5, rook f7. And I'm sure that the game would have ended in a draw, because Caruana's prep to bishop g5, which is the main move, would be very good. But Hikaru went knight g3, which he mixed up his preparation, and it turned out to be a great thing, because Caruana now started to think. And he played bd3, which is a good move, queen d2. And now it was important for Fabi to push the e pawn, e4, knight h4, and queen e6, which leads to position which is interesting, and a lot of stuff happening here. But black seems to be doing pretty fine. Instead, Fabi pushed c4, and now what has happened is that the e5 pawn will become a target, and when you will push it anyway to e4, then the d4 square will be lost. So if the pawn was back here, it would have been good for black here. So that's the reason why rook d7, bishop f2. Now you can see that he's attacking the e5 pawn here. Rook f7, so that you can't take. If you take on e5 with the rook, I have rook f3. If you take with the knight, I have rook takes f2. So the bishop needed to be protected. Knight h1, e4, knight d4. Finally, you have to give up that d4 square. And the main issue is this bishop on d3, which looks very strong for now, which is taking care of this. The bishop can't move. There's a back rank mate. In fact, is not very well placed, and you will see in the game that it starts to have no real role. But also keep an eye on this knight, which is the hero of this game. Goes from d2 to f1 to g3 to h1 for now. Queen g6, and I think this is where Hikaru comes up with a very good move. White to play. What do you do? So when you look at such a position, you think to yourself, what are the moves? You realize that you can't move the knight because bishop will hang. You can't move the bishop because there's a back rank mate. So you think about starting to move your this knight, queen, rook. Nothing really makes sense. Then you say that, okay, can I push my pawn here? Maybe that's possible. Let's say I can play b4. But then black wants to go knight d6, knight f5. And suddenly you realize that maybe I can do two things at one time. I can push my pawn to h4, creating a back rank loof, and also creating threats of h5. And so from there, the move h4 is found. And if you found this move, well done, guys. Excellent job. This is a tough move to find, and it's amazing if you got it. Perhaps instead of queen g6, knight c5 was a possibility for black. But anyway, queen g6, h4. Now h5 should have been played by Fabi after queen g5 takes g6, knight c6. It looks as if white is going to be better after a move like knight e5. But let's say knight d6, knight e5, and another important move that black must find here. Black to play, what would you play here? Well, if you move your rook, you're going to lose your g6 pawn. So the right move is e3. You can't take with the bishop because of rook f1. So you have to play rook takes e3. But now I go rook e7 and black is fighting very well in this game. So h5 should have been played, but he went knight c5 and then came h5, queen d6, bishop g4. The key point is that I have stopped knight e6 from entering because your bishop and knight are looking at this square. h6, queen to e3, queen f4, and just take, rook takes, knight e6. He could have also given a check and taken here, but Hikaru decides to give a check with fork with the knight and now pick this up. And you can see that Hikaru's strategy has triumphed. He has been able to make inroads. His pieces just maneuvered behind the pawns and now he's won back one pawn. Black has still one extra pawn and a rook for two pieces. After rook f5 came bishop c6 and then rook takes h5 was played. If rook f6, there is bishop d7. So rook h5, bishop d4, rook f5, knight f2, good move, rook f7. Now I thought he could anyway take here and play this position. This also looks very, very good for white. But Hikaru thought that the e4 pawn is something which he can win anyway. So he went b4, which is a good move. Because if you play takes, then I can take back and push my pawn to b4 and get the a file for my rook. So a very nice move by Hikaru, b4, h5. Fabi now starts to play interestingly. It's the last 40th move we are reaching. It's move number 38. And here Hikaru could have done this very nicely. Bishop e8, rook f5, and the rook is trapped, g3. But he decided to play a4, takes bishop a4, h4, bishop e3. And maybe this was not the best move. There were other possibilities like rook a1 here that could have been played and take here. The main point is that now rook f3 does not hit the bishop here and you save a crucial tempo. You will see that in the game. After bishop e3, rook f5, rook a1, h3, Caruana had put a lot of pressure on Hikaru here. It's your move. What would you play here as white? So the first thing is you cannot take with the knight because of rook f1, and once the rooks are traded, black is really very much into the game. He can go rook e1, e3, e2. The second point is that if you take g takes h3, then after rook f3, black is even better. This pushing really well in this position. And the last point is that if you play rook a2, that is the correct move. There is also knight g4, but I don't want to trade rooks. That's the main point here. So rook a2 does the job, because now after h2 I have things controlled here. You can't give up your pawn, and also after h takes g2 you need to find another important move white to play. So the threat is rook f3. So if you play king g2, rook f3, and black is back in the game. So Hikaru had to find another good move, which is bishop d1. Excellent move, stopping rook f3, rook f6, and now he played bg4, king g2. So all under control here. Bishop f1, stopping knight h3 to g5, maybe those ideas. Bishop d4, bishop went back, king f4, now bishop f5. You can see how slowly all the pieces come in, and by the way, the knight d2, f1, g3, h1, f2, g4, still going strong. Rook d6, knight e3, attacking, knight e3, beautifully blockading the pawn. Bishop c5, rook here, and now Hikaru goes king e5, and at this point he makes an error. He goes knight d5, and at this point the knight was well positioned. A move like rook f2 would have really helped, threatening bishop e6 check, but he went knight d5, and this allowed Fabi to get some counterplay with takes, and e3. Although it's still winning for white, he has to be more careful. Bishop f2, rook b8, and now comes bishop e1, check, and now Hikaru had to find king d4. It was slightly tough because after rook e4, king c5, rook e5, it might seem that it's difficult to make progress with bishop e4 coming. But after takes, bishop e4, rook d6 and rook f5 threatening here, somehow white is winning after rook d7, king f8, and now or first starting off with king d4 attacking the bishop. Let's say you take, rook takes, rook f1, bg3, rook g1, rook e5, rook g3, rook e2, and then you take this, and with 2 pawns you win. So this was a way to continue. Instead he went king f4, and this allowed another powerful move for black to play. What would you do? g5 check. And after let's say king takes g5, in comes rook e5 check, and you lose the knight. So king g3, rook e6. If you played rook e5 here, there was knight c7, rook f5, knight a6, rook f1, rook a1, king e6, b5, king d5. And here the resistance is very strong. It might seem like it might not be even possible to win this, but let's say if I go king here, check, king here, I'm not sure how to assess this. White should be winning at some point here, but it is going to be difficult to convert it because there is this rook that's constantly coming to f1. Rook e6 was played in the game, and now king f2, rook h6, good move, king e3, rook e6, king f2, rook h6, knight e3. And now I think Caruana had to find rook h1, but even that would have lost. But at least the defense would have been tougher. Like I was thinking g4 here, and so that you can create some kind of a net around the king, and king e3, rook g1, king f2, rook h1. You can stay in there. Maybe king g3, bishop e4, rook takes, bishop f3. It's not so easy to play these positions. King e6, take, and something like this. And white has to try and win such a game, because if you play bd2, this is all very crammed up, king e5, and black is doing very well. So rook f6 by Fabi, I think, was the final error, because now after rook f1 there is knight g2, rook f6, bishop f2, and once the knight comes back to e1 to blockade the pawn, which he was blockading on e3, but now the last job for the knight, who has been clearly the man of the match here, knight d4, rook here, and the final move the knight makes, and here Fabi resigns. So the pawn is going nowhere, this is dropping, this is weak, and so Hikaru managed to win this game. And with this he managed to also take the lead in the tournament, not the lead, sorry, reduce the lead of Fabi. Now Nepo is still on 6, Caruana on 5, Nakamura on 4.5. That's how things stand. But guys, today is the big clash between Caruana and Nepo. And so if Fabi manages to beat Nepo, we have a tournament that is wide open. For now, Hikaru has played his part in trying to open up things. And who knows, we might see a lot of twists in the games to come. For now, this is Sagar Shah signing off. Bye bye.